Hi guys, in this tutorial we are going to be looking at creating the night model. Okay, when creating something as intricate as the night chess piece, I will always use some form of reference material. I find it much easier to be able to model up against something as opposed to kind of just figuring stuff out from my head. If you can get a real chess piece, that's good, and you can have that in front of you, but to have some form of image in Cinema 4D will aid us greatly when we're trying to get the shape right. Now, on my desktop, I have already got the night image that I'm going to be using. I have downloaded and paid for that from Shutterstock. Okay, so that's a great little website if you're interested in getting any images of a variety of different things, or if you find other places on the internet or are able to take pictures. Obviously, for other models, you could use your own drawings. But in this instance, I'm going to use my pre-made image. To put it into Cinema 4D, I'm going to select the night image and then I'm going to drag and drop it to my materials manager and then let go. Then it will ask, do I wish to create a copy at this location? And I will click yes. It means that there will always be a copy of that image wherever my Cinema 4D file is saved. Okay. And if I just double click that material, you can see that I now have the night image in there as a color texture. I'm just going to untick reflectance. Okay, I don't really want my image to be shiny at this point. I only want to be able to see its image. So I'm just going to close the materials manager. Now I need to apply it to something, and I'm going to apply it to a cube, okay, or a plane. I'm going to choose a plane actually. So if I create a plane, you can see that it now creates a plane on the floor, and to apply my material, I simply drag and drop from the materials manager. So click, drag and drop onto the materials manager the picture of the night. Now its proportions are a little bit skew, so I find the easiest way to make sure that it is in scale to its proportions is to just click on your material once, and that opens the material in the attributes manager. And what that says is it has a resolution 513,793. Okay, so 513 by 793. So on my width, so 513, and my height 713. And that adjusts the plane so that it's the same ratio as my image. What I'll need to do at a later date, when I put all of the files together, I will need to scale the night down undoubtedly, but I can at least see what's going on and marry this up. Now I need to rotate this, so selecting the plane and going to the rotate tool, I'm just going to rotate this 90 degrees, and holding shift will allow me to do it in increments of 10. Okay, that now means that I can utilize this as a background. Okay, so I'm just going to rotate it another 90 degrees because of the symmetry object I will create shortly. Okay, so I'm going to introduce you to a few other tools now that we're going to be using in Cinema 4D to create this night model. And one of those is one of the other generators called the subdivision surface. Okay, so I'm just going to create that. Another tool I'm going to use is the symmetry object. So by clicking and holding on that button there, I have access to the symmetry object, okay, and that creates it. Now, unlike the other tutorials where you've been creating models with splines, in this instance you're going to be creating it with a cube. This is called box modeling or polygonal modeling. So in order to start my box modeling, I'm going to create a box. Okay, and that gives me the original cube that I'm going to be making my base out of, and then the rest of the night. So I need to make sure that that's going to be in roughly the same position and is roughly the same height as what it is I want to create. Okay, and then I can change its width so that it matches in that sort of instance. Okay, and then I can make that the same. So just to make sure that it's roughly the same, it's, say, just neaten those numbers up, 415 by 415. Okay, at least for me anyway, so that they're the same. So it's definitely square. Okay. Now I'm going to increase the number of segments in this cube so that I can edit them in a minute. And to do that, with the cube selected in the Attributes Manager, I'm just going to change them to 2 by 2 by 2. Now at the moment, you can't see that. So I'm going to change my display settings. So I'm going to display and change it to ground shading with lines. And that allows me to see the polygons that are being created around my cube. And on my night plane as well, actually, which I might just adjust now. So selecting the plane, I'm just going to change the width and height segments to 1 and 1, just so I don't have any other lines in my way when creating it. Now, I'm going to put my cube in my symmetry object, just to kind of see what it's going to do. And if I do that, you can see that very little changes. However, if I move my cube, you can now see that I have 2 copies of it. The symmetry object acts like a mirror, and what I do to one side will adjust to the other. I'm just going to undo to make sure that goes back to the same place. The plane is right smack bang in the middle, thankfully at 0, 0, 0, so I can use that as the middle point to create my night model. So because I only have to use or create one side of this model, now I have the symmetry, I need to delete the side that I don't need. So with my cube selected, I'm going to make it editable. And then using my selection tool, I'm just going to go to my points and I'm going to delete these. Okay, I'm just going to turn off the symmetry for the moment, just so you can see what it will do. And if I delete those points, you can see that half of those disappear, and I'm just left with this side. Then I'm going to turn the symmetry object back on by clicking the red X, and you can see that I've got that side. But I no longer have access to its points because they are being mirrored from that side. Now I'm going to use the generator, and the generator I've created is the subdivision surface. The other generators we've used always use some form of spline. Now in this instance we use an object, and the object we're going to use this time is the cube with the symmetry. So with the symmetry selected, drag and drop, and I'm going to drag it into the subdivision surface. And you can see that that instantly changes the way that that is created. So it's no longer as blocky, no longer as square. I can just untick the the subdivision surface, and you can see that it changes. Now, what I need to do in an effort to make that look more like the base of an object, I'm just going to select the edges. So using my selection tool and my edges, I'm just going to select those bottom edges here. Now, the base of a chess piece is generally flat and doesn't curve the way that this does. So I can change that. The subdivision surface rounds everything out. It's really great for making more organic looking things, but in this instance, I need it to be flatter. So I can control that using what they call subdivision surface weighting. To access that, with my edges selected, if I hold full stop on my keyboard, so hold it down with your finger, okay, sorry, go to the move tool first, hold the full stop button down and click and drag left to right, you can see that that changes. It stops being as curvy as it was, and it sort of reverts back to some of the flatness that the original polygon has, and that gives me that nice flat base. And now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to select those corner points, okay, and I'm just going to move those in a little bit, and then I'm going to scale them just so that we can kind of get a more rounded base than we did. And it's always good to check the other side so I can see what effect it's having on the symmetry in comparison to what it's doing here. Okay, So I'm going to use this night as a guide. I'm not going to marry it up exactly, but this instance really does help. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to utilize the polygons on the top. So going to the move tool, going to the polygon mode, I'm going to select the polygons on top. Okay, and then I'm going to extrude up a little bit more. So using M and T, I'm just going to extrude those polygons up. Okay, and that gives me some more geometry to play with. So we've got some issues there with regards to the hyperNURBs. Okay, so if I'm just going to turn off the subdivision surface, and then if I turn off the symmetry, you can see that it creates some more polygons on the inside. So I'm just going to delete those, and you can see that that rounds out my base better. So it's just simply selecting the polygons and pressing delete. Now that's going to keep happening every time we extrude up. So one of the things I find that's really useful to do is actually to delete the polygons on top. That means that we end up with this sort of open barrel, and I will model using the edges. So having selected the polygons on top and deleting, I will now select the edges that I wish to adjust. And then what I can do, I can, using the scale tool, I can scale those in, and then using the points, if I wish to adjust other things, I can move those in, and you can see that we get that sort of instance on the inside where it's much curvier and it starts to curve in. Now, I will always use edges when it comes to extruding, certainly when using symmetry, because I find that I've got much more control. So if I do another extrude, so M and T will give me an extrusion. Now, I find that doing 0 extrudes works really well. What a 0 extrude does is it creates an exact copy of the lines or edges or polygons that you have where its originals are. So if I just turn off the subdivision surface and click apply, you can see that very little changes. It's exactly the way it was. So if I just undo so that we haven't got it, and then turn my subdivision on and then apply, it gives you some more geometry to be able to play with and edit and adjust at the right sort of perspectives, okay, at the right sort of levels, the right sort of heights, in order to carry on modeling from where I left off. Okay, so that gives me that. So what I'm going to do, just to start with, is I'm going to create a variety of extrudes to start getting the shape of this more like the night model that I need. So M and T, I'm just going to do a new transform, and then I'm going to lift it up. Okay, now the night obviously doesn't start that round, so I'm going to select a couple of those edges, and then I'm going to move those in so that it starts to get towards the base of the horse head much easier. So I'm going to shift select a couple of those edges again, M and T, and I'm going to do a new transform and move up. Now using the scale, I'm just going to roughly match where the night images meet. Okay, so I just want to get a rough shape to start with. M and T, and you'll find that using the move and then the scale tool is really useful. Note that I'm only scaling in one direction at the moment, and that's just to meet the silhouette of this night. So I'm just going to do that a few times, and I can move them. Okay, so note that if I hover over it, I can move those all around. I'm not extruding or adding any more. New transform. The secret to polygonal modelling is use the geometry that you need, or use the amount of geometry that you need to get the shape, but don't overdo it. The more geometry you have, the harder it is to edit it later. So I'm doing all of these to kind of marry up with all of the, oops, forgot to do the transform. I'm doing this to sort of marry up with the outline, and I might just sort of adjust those front ones rather than that this time. Maybe I'll move that one further back. Go back to the edge tool, and that allows me, my selection saves. So I can do a new transform, and I can go up, I can go back, and I can just scale it in. And you can see that we're starting to get that sort of shape. Now, I know that the knight model itself has a much thinner neck sort of at this point, so I can sort of adjust these so that we're not producing something that looks like it's a little bit deformed. There will be some editing required later, but this just gives it a little bit more form before I need to do that. And go back to the edges, new transform, up and select, okay. So maybe I need to just start bringing those in. Okay. Now this is going to be the more interesting part when it gets to the face model. Okay, so when it gets to the part where the nose and the mouth start coming out. And to do that, I'm going to do it in a couple of sections. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this first front point. So I'm just going to turn off the plane for a second so you can see what we've got at the moment. I'm just going to delete that point. Okay. Because what I'm going to do is, using the edges here, I'm just going to extrude up. Okay, so I'm going to go up and then get that sort of angle right for the back, and then I'm going to transform again, just roughly mapping to that shape. Okay, you can see that that starts to fill in, as it were, the areas around the head. So going to the points mode and just going back into there, just going to adjust some of this so you can see that we get those sort of shapes in. Okay, now the ears are going to be a little bit tricky to do straight away. So what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to sort of finish this and then add the ears a little bit later on. So that gives the majority of that shape. Okay, now I'm going to adjust these ones. Just make sure I haven't got anything in the back selected, to make sure that I've got this more rounded sort of feature for the head. Otherwise it's going to be a very sort of flat looking knight. I'm just going to turn that image off. You can see that I've got that. I mean, so there'll be some adjustments later maybe. And depending on the knight model that you have and the shape that you want it to be will really depend on how you model this and how much time you want to spend sort of editing and adjusting the basic shape that you are going to create yourself. Okay, so maybe that one. Ooh, notice that I accidentally selected behind. It's always really good to check when you are modelling that you are only editing the points that you are expecting to edit. Nothing is worse than getting halfway through a model, then finally looking at the other side and realise that it's now a completely different shape. So now, using the front edges that have been made by extruding that up, I'm going to M and T, and I'm going to apply some zero extrusions, and I'm going to utilize this front. You can see that I've got some shaping to do, so I'm just going to move those down and I'm going to move those up. If you want a more sort of accurate side view, then utilize one of the side views. So press, in this instance, F3. Obviously at the moment you can't see the image, so if I go to display and go out shading lines again, you can see that I now have access to the full sort of editor quality of that image, and I can adjust these in a more accurate fashion. So if I just go back to there, I may want to bring that one back. And I'm just going to move those up. Here we go. So back to the edge mode. Okay, new transform, and again, and down. And I'm just going to rotate that just so it fits a little bit better. Adjust the points as I need to get the shape of this horse's head. Okay, and again. Okay, so there's a little bit of tweaking, there's a little bit of fiddling available, or as necessary really as part of this thing. Box modelling can be really fiddly, but the way I look at it is that it gives you much more control and much more detail over modelling things like this. The grey matter is like some sort of skin, and all of these points stretch that skin out and move it and stretch it in that sort of fashion. So if the thing that you're modelling isn't the right shape, then you need to adjust these points, because it will stretch or pull or push that back into the shape that you need it to be. So I'm just going to, nearly done with this mouth. Okay. And every now and again, it's a good idea to just nip back into the 3D view. This idea, it appears to be a bit of a wide-faced thing. So that's why it's really good in 3D to occasionally nip back into 3D and make sure that you are adjusting what you are expecting. Now, edges or points at this point don't really make much of a difference, as long as you can select what you need to thin out the shape a little bit. And again, the detail that you wish to go into for your model is entirely down to you in order to get the shape that you are after. Okay. Cool. Okay, so we are very nearly there in at least sort of finalizing that. I'm not going to worry too much about the mouth aspect of this. I'm just going to kind of close it off. And then move it down, scale it in that way, scale it there, and then move these points in. Okay, so I'm very nearly done. Just going to remove that plane a little bit, but obviously we have a great gaping hole in his head. So to close this up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these edges. Okay. And then I'm going to create another extrude from there. So M and T and new transform, and then I get this line that allows me to kind of close up that gap on the top, but it's not going to meet. It's not going to meet properly. So what I'm going to do is use the scale tool, and by shift clicking, okay, you can see that I can close up that gap, okay, a little bit. Now that doesn't entirely solve the problem, because what I need to do is make sure that all of my points are at 0. So using the points mode is better. So by shift clicking all of those points that I wish to be in the center, I can now scale those to 0. So using my scale there, you can see that that changes the shape. If I hold shift, that means that I can scale directly down to 0. And that means that they are now zeroed out, that they are the same sort of coordinate system along that axis that I had selected, which is the x-axis. And now on the x-axis here, it shows me the coordinates of those, and if I put those at 0, you can see that that seals itself quite nicely around the top. Sort of great gaping mouth now, it seems. And I've got a little tiny hole at the back. Okay, that little tiny hole is caused by the fact that I extruded those edges and I didn't include this one here. But the easiest thing to do is to make sure that I have those two selected. Using the selection tool, just select those two, and then I'm going to weld them together. Okay, and to weld, it's M, and then you can see its weld is Q. Okay, and I'm just going to, I can choose where I weld it, whether I weld it to that point, or its halfway house. So I'm going to weld it to this one because I know that that's also definitely at 0. And you can see that we get that nice, smooth sort of finish. Now we just need to solve the interesting problem of the front. Okay, so to do that, we're going to look at sort of like the geometry that we have and see how best to solve it. Okay, so there are 6. Okay, it's always best to attempt to avoid triangles if ever you can in this sort of stuff, but sometimes it's not always going to be that easy. So, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that polygon there. Ooh, I've missed one. Okay, you can see that we've got this issue here. This is what happens if you don't ensure that your points are at 0 when they need to be. Okay, so, and you can see that the moment I put it to 0, it sorts itself brilliantly. So if I just undo, so you can see that it overlaps, it stretches, it skews, and just guessing maybe where it might be won't work. The best thing to do is use the coordinates manager, press 0, press enter, and then I know that that is sealed. Okay, so now I'm going to select that edge, and I'm going to select that edge. Okay, and I'm going to do an extrude, apply, and then I'm just going to shrink the two so that they start to marry up in the middle. Okay, well, sort of. Easiest way, just shrink those, and maybe I can sort of utilize this. It just means that it will meet in the middle quite nicely, and I can sort out what I need to do. I've created some strange nostrils. So using the points, I'm going to select those 2 points that I want to weld together, M and Q, and then that welds those, and then I'm going to select those 2 points, M and Q, and that welds those. Okay, now I'm going to use another tool to sort of block up the nostrils, as it were, And that tool I'm going to use is the bridge tool. So on the edges mode, because it's the easiest way of using it, I'm going to go to M, and you can see that B is bridge. Now if I hover over this edge, you can see that it highlights, or whichever edge I'm nearest, it will highlight white. So it lets me know that that's the one I will start bridging. So if I left click and then I drag to the shape, you can see that that will automatically close that up. I mean, you can drag all over the shop and it will try and bridge to everything crazy and doolally, but that's not what I want at all. So if I just close that one up and then again, and I have my sealed horse head, as it were. Okay, now as I mentioned, I need to finalize the ears, but the ears are separate. They don't have a, otherwise it'd be a unicorn, I think, in the middle. So I'm just going to adjust the shape of that, just so I get the curvature of the head a little bit more like that night model image I'm utilizing. Okay. So that gives me some sort of maneuvering room in order to create those ears. Now, I am going to just select these points and just bring them out a little bit, just so I've got something to create my ear on. So, using the polygons, I'm going to use that one. Okay, as I think it's probably going to be its best bet. I'm going to lower the height of that line so that it will, lost that point there, give me a nice direction. Okay, and utilizing that, M and T, and I'm going to extrude out. Okay, and you can see that I've got, turn that plane off. I've got a very interesting looking horse at this point, but it should give me the shape that I want to in a second once I'm done adjusting. I think I turned it into a sock puppet. So turning that on, you can see that I'm probably going to need a little bit more geometry to fully get that shape out, and maybe I need to adjust the geometry that's already there so that it's a little less sort of spiky. Maybe I'll do this in the side mode. Okay, so making sure that those two are back where they sort of like they marry up to the side view of that one. Okay, and then M and T and extrude up again. Okay, you can see that, there we go. We get a night model that gives us a rough shape. Obviously there's some sort of tweaking to do, and you can edit and change that shape in a variety of different ways depending on what it is that you're after. You can spend a few hours tweaking and experimenting and exploring some of the polygons and things like that, or changing some of the bits that you don't want, and it's all down to your sort of personal preference and what it is that you are trying to model and the level of detail that you wish to go into. So I'm quite happy with the way it looks in those sort of fashions. I mean, you can maybe make this look a lot less square if you wanted, so you could maybe select those in and then drag those and move those out a little bit. Okay, you've got access to everything. Just going back to the side view, if I wanted to make sure that I edited all of those in one go, under my selection tool, I've got something that says only select visible elements. And that means that if I select those on the front and then go to the 3D view, it doesn't select those on the back. Whereas in this instance, I want to. So if I untick that and then I select these, I can sort of pull them out a bit, select those and pull those in. And it means that I am changing the shape of this from both sides. Okay, so maybe I do want to sort of thin his head out a little bit. Okay, and I can adjust those in that sort of way. But you see, I can be sitting here adjusting this for ever, depending on what it is that you want your night model to look and how you want it to kind of fit. It's entirely up to you. Okay, right. Well, that gives you the basics. If I just turn my ground shading back off, you can see that I've got my night model there. Okay. Cool. Right. Well, I shall see you in the next tutorial.